White, everything was pure white. Even behind her eyelids, she could feel that sterile, soulless whiteness. Young Sarah's eyes slowly opened. The neon lights on the ceiling felt like thousands of needles piercing directly into her brain. She tried to turn her head, but her neck felt as if it wasn't hers. Her arms, her legs, they were there. She could feel their presence, but she couldn't control them. The coldness on her back was the chilling point where metal met bare skin. This couldn't be a hospital. Hospitals smelled of healing. This place smelled only of bleach and fear. There was a more deliberate silence in the air. Subject 47, awake. The voice came from a speaker in the corner of the room, crackling and metallic in tone. It sounded as if it were addressing an object, not a person. Sarah wanted to scream. She filled her lungs with air, opened her mouth, but all that came out was a muffled, wet rattle. Her throat was dry, as if lined with sandpaper. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, like the flapping wings of a trapped bird. Pure panic, her body was betraying her, heart rate rising, adrenaline levels returning to normal. Good, very good. The fact that she's responding improves the quality of the data. This second voice was closer. A woman, cold, as emotionless as a lab technician. A white plastic mask entered Sarah's field of vision. The eyes behind the mask, they were the worst part. Analytical, icy, looking at her not like a child, but like a cell under a microscope. The masked woman scribbled something on the clipboard in her hand. "We're starting now," the woman said, holding the syringe up to the light. The blue liquid inside the syringe glowed like a fluorescent light in the room's dead white. "You won't feel any pain, Sarah. You'll just be freed from some burdens. Forgetting is sometimes the greatest reward." The cold tip of the needle met the skin on her neck. All of Sarah's muscles tensed in a final act of resistance. As the liquid pumped into her veins, it felt like cold ink was being poured into her brain. First the colors faded, then the sounds drowned out, and finally, absolute darkness. 15 years later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell pushed the cold coffee cup on her desk aside. The clock in her office showed 3 in the afternoon. Outside, the never-ending hum of Boston traffic echoed, but this therapy room on the 5th floor felt like a sanctuary, cut off from the rest of the world. Sarah was in control here. She helped people mend their broken minds, shining a light into their dark tunnels. But the batteries in her own light were running low. To kill time, perhaps to clear her mind before the evening's intense session, she put on her headphones and clicked on the latest episode of the True Crime Psychology podcast channel. For criminal psychologists, cases like this were like solving puzzles. But the title of this episode made Sarah hold her breath as she stared at the screen. Winterbourne Institute, Broken Minds and Erased Lives. Sarah's fingers trembled over the play button. Winterbourne. That name sat like a rusty nail in the darkest corner of her mind. Where did she remember it from? Why did her stomach clench when she heard that word? Our guest today is Dr. Richard Voss, said the host. His voice was professional, but curious. He served as a senior researcher at the Winterbourne Institute in the 1990s, but suddenly resigned and disappeared in the early 2000s. Dr. Voss, why did you decide to speak out after 20 years? There was a silence. The voice that followed sounded as if it were coming from the depths of a grave. A tired, raspy, regret-filled voice. I have to speak because I'm going to die, said Voss. Cancer has taken over my lungs, but my conscience is suffocating me even more. I see those children's faces in my dreams every night. What we did to them, I can't take it. To the grave. Sarah sat up straight in her chair. Her heart began to beat like Sarah's heart on that old metal table. Winterbourne was officially listed as a research center for gifted children. The host continued. What were you really doing there? Voss laughed bitterly. Gifted? No, we were trauma architects. Winterbourne was a memory manipulation kitchen. Our goal was this. Could we take a person's most severe trauma and bury it in an inaccessible corner of the mind? Winterbourne was a memory manipulation kitchen. Our goal was this. Could we take a person's most severe trauma and bury it in an inaccessible corner of the mind? If we succeeded, we could create the perfect soldier, the perfect spy, or the perfect citizen, cleansed of their past. That was our theory. And the subjects? Children, said Voss, his voice trembling. Mostly 12 to 14 years old. Orphans, the systems. Forgotten children. Troubled youths their families couldn't care for. We knew no one would. Look for them. We gave them numbers. They were no longer names. They were subjects. The pen in Sarah's hand fell onto the table. Subject. What did you do to them, Dr. Voss? Please, give me details. Controlled trauma, said Voss. First, we confronted them with their greatest fears. We locked those afraid of enclosed spaces in small cells, played high-frequency sounds to those afraid of noise. We didn't stop until their minds were shattered. Once the mind was broken, it became easier to intervene in those fractures. We used a chemical compound we called MB47. This liquid weakened the synaptic connections between memories. Then came hypnosis and isolation. Sarah stood up. The walls of the room were closing in on her. She walked to the window, but the world outside was now foreign. Every word Voss spoke was like a shoulder ram against a locked door in Sarah's mind. There was a girl, Voss said on the podcast. Subject 47. I'll never forget her. She was different from the others. She resisted. No matter how much medication we gave her, no matter how much we isolated her, she held onto the truth in a corner of her mind. We applied the heaviest protocols on her. We thought we had turned her into an empty shell, but one day she approached the lab glass and looked at me and said, "I'm still here." That was when I decided to resign. Subject 47. A buzzing started in Sarah's ears. Images began to flash. White lights, a blue syringe, a masked woman, and a number, 47. She rushed back to her desk and opened her laptop. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Winterbourne Institute," into the search engine. The first results that came up were for an old building that had been closed in 2010 due to insufficient funding. Deep in the forests of New Hampshire, far from civilization, a forgotten structure. Her blood ran cold as she scrolled through the images. The rusty sign at the building's entrance was the very place the man in the podcast had described. But what really shook Sarah was a file photo, a leaked frame from an old, dusty archive, a yellow file marked Subject 47 in red pen. In the corner of the file was a small, burnt-edged photograph, 13-year-old Sarah. That defiant, unbroken look in her eyes, even then. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. My family died in a car accident. I grew up in state care, college, scholarships, a PhD. It was all my achievement. But now it all felt like fiction. As if someone had given her a script and she had played that role for 15 years. She thought of her therapist, Rebecca. Why did Rebecca always say, not remembering certain memories is a defense mechanism? Don't force it. When she went to her every week and told her about the gaps in her past, was Rebecca involved too? Sarah grabbed her phone. She had to call Rebecca. No, she couldn't trust anyone. If what Voss said was true, she could still be being watched. She rushed out of her office. She looked at herself in the elevator mirror. A stylish jacket, well-groomed hair, a successful career. Was it all a lie? Her reflection in the mirror wavered for a moment. For a second, just a second, she saw not her 28-year-old self in the mirror, but that little girl in a white apron, her arms bruised. Sarah closed her eyes, shook her head. No, no, no. It's not real. It's psychosis. I've studied too many cases. My mind is playing tricks on me. But when she got into her car, she had already entered the address into the navigation system. Winterbourne, New Hampshire. The radio was off during the 3-hour drive. She listened only to her own breathing and the tires whining on the asphalt. The trees along the road looked like giants in the evening darkness that had fallen upon them. Sarah was driving toward that void she had spent her whole life running from. When she reached the Institute's entrance, it was completely dark. The massive iron gates were chained shut, but the fences on the sides had collapsed in places. She hid her car among the bushes. She took her flashlight and phone and got out of the car. The air was freezing. New Hampshire's damp cold seeped into her bones. The wind blowing through the forest, seemed to carry the whispers of thousands of children. Sarah began to walk. With each step, another veil in her mind was torn away. "Turn back," a voice inside her said. "If you walk through that door, you can never be Dr. Sarah Mitchell." Again, Sarah didn't stop. "I never was," she whispered. When she reached the clearing in front of the building, the imposing and decaying Winterbourne mansion appeared before her. It stood in the darkness like a giant gravestone. The broken windows, illuminated by the moonlight seeping inside, looked like the empty cavities of a toothless mouth. She headed for the entrance door. It wasn't locked. It creaked open with a heavy push. The smell inside, dust, mold, and that unforgettable chemical odor. Sarah held her flashlight to the end of the corridor. The paint on the walls had peeled like skin, falling to the floor. The moment she stepped forward, a voice echoed in her mind. "State your name, subject 47. Sarah trembled. This voice wasn't coming from a speaker. This voice was coming from the walls, or perhaps directly from her veins. "My name is Sarah," she replied inwardly. "No," said the voice. "You have no name. You are a data set. You are a success story." Sarah walked down the corridor. She followed the laboratory sign. This was where everything began and ended. When she entered, she saw the metal tables still in place. Some of them still had leather straps on them. Sarah held her flashlight over a table. There were nail marks on the metal, deep, desperate nail marks. She approached the table, placed her hand on its cold surface. The moment she touched it, she let that day from 15 years ago crash down on her with all its violence. The coldness at her fingertips seeped through her skin and climbed up her spine. This table, she knew, this damned pile of metal. When she closed her eyes, the musty smell filling her nose gave way to a sharp smell of ammonia and burnt flesh. His mind was suddenly thrown back. He was 13 years old. His arms were bound with leather straps. The lamp on the ceiling flickered, on and off. He couldn't see Dr. Voss's face as he stood over him, only the coffee stain on his white coat. "Pain is a teacher, Sarah," said Voss, bringing the electrode closer to the girl's temple. "Pain teaches your brain what is important and what is unimportant. Now tell me your mother's name." "Emily," said little Sarah, crying. "Her name is Emily." Voss pressed the button. The electric current shook her body until her teeth chattered. Sarah's scream was muffled by the insulated walls of the room. "Wrong," Voss said calmly. "You have no mother. You belong to the state. Try again." Current, pain, darkness. Sarah opened her eyes, gasping for breath. The flashlight's beam flickered. "Emily," she whispered, into the darkness. Her mother's name was Emily. She hadn't forgotten that, or she thought she had forgotten, and then suddenly remembered 15 years later. But what about the other memories? Her father's face, her brother's smile. Had they all been erased by those electric shocks? He moved away from the table. His stomach was churning. He couldn't stay in this room any longer. He stepped back into the hallway. He decided to head deeper into the building, toward the upper floors. Because the answers weren't in the basement, they were upstairs, where the management was. The stairs creaked with every step. The wooden steps were rotten. When he reached the second floor, the atmosphere changed. The musty smell from below was gone here. In fact, strangely, the air was clean. A light breeze, as if from a working ventilation system, hit his face. Sarah paused. Ventilation didn't work in an abandoned building. There was no electricity. She turned off her flashlight. She waited until her eyes adjusted to the darkness. And then she saw it. At the very end of the corridor, a thin, faint beam of light seeped from under a door. Her heart was pounding in her throat. Her logic screamed, "Run. Someone's here. Maybe homeless people. Maybe drug addicts." But her instinct, that primal survival urge, said something else. "They're waiting for you." She crept silently along the wall. He approached the door where the light was seeping through. There was a brass plate above the door. Observation and recording room. Sarah reached for the door handle. The metal was warm. There must be machines running inside. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The scene she saw pushed the limits of what her brain could comprehend. The room was not abandoned. On the contrary, it was equipped with the latest technology. The sound of fans from the server cabinets lined up along the wall filled the room. Dozens of monitors were on the large console in the middle, and they were all active. Sarah entered the room, the door closing silently behind her. She approached the monitors. Her eyes scanned the screens, and her knees buckled at what she saw. Her eyes scanned the screens, and her knees buckled at what she saw. The first screen showed her office in Boston. It was empty now, but the camera angle was perfect. Every detail was clear, down to the placement of the pen holder on her desk. The second screen showed her bedroom at home, the book on her bedside table, the glass of water she had hurriedly left there that morning. The third screen showed her therapist Rebecca's office. The fourth screen, the interior of her car. Right now, it was parked in the forest. It was being filmed from a hidden camera under the steering wheel. "Oh my God," Sarah said, her voice trembling. They weren't just watching, they were there. Every single moment. 15 years. Going to the bathroom, showering, crying, laughing, her first kiss, her graduation ceremony. All of it had been watched, recorded, and archived by someone in this room. There had never been any privacy. She was a lab rat in a jar. But that wasn't the real shock. An open file on the console caught his attention. The file cover read, Subject 47. Observation Report, Phase 2. The date was today. With trembling hands, he opened the file. The text on the pages was not typewritten, but computer printed. Subject 47, 1430, Test subject began listening to podcast. Pulse rose to 85. Trigger words. Successfully processed. 14:45. Test subject conducted internet search. Expected behavior pattern. 15:10. Test subject departed. Phase 2. Recall protocol successfully initiated. Sarah dropped the file. Papers scattered on the floor. This was no accident. The podcast was no accident. Her coming there was not her own free will. She had been summoned. Like a programmed robot, she was commanded to return home upon hearing the keywords. Why? She shouted into the empty room. Why? Because we needed to test the variables. The voice came from behind her. Sarah spun around quickly. In the dim corner of the room, in the shadow of the server cabinets, a silhouette stood. Who are you? Sarah pointed her flashlight in that direction, but the light flickered and went out. The damn battery was dead, or it had been tampered with. I am everything you are not, said the silhouette. The voice was soft, but had a metallic ring to it. Step by step, it moved into the light, into the area illuminated by the monitors. Sarah held her breath. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her brain was rejecting this image. The woman in front of her was herself. Same height, same facial features, same eyes. But her hair was different, short, and bluntly cut. She wasn't wearing a doctor's coat, but a gray outfit resembling a prison jumpsuit. And her eyes, while Sarah's eyes held fear and shock, the woman's eyes held a deep, bottomless void. You, Sarah recoiled, her back hitting the console. You're a hallucination. The drugs, stress. You're not real. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was just a muscle movement. Everyone thinks they're real, and the others are imaginary, Sarah. It's the human mind's most tragic defense. Mechanism. I'm subject 48. And no, I'm not a hallucination. I'm the control group. The control group. The basic rule of scientific experiments, said subject 48, slowly circling the table. His movements were like a predator eyeing its prey. When you test a drug, you give it to one group and a placebo to the other. Or you give freedom to one group and keep the other caged. Then you compare the results. Sarah's brain was trying to piece things together, but the pieces were too sharp, cutting. Her mind, so are we twins, siblings? We are the same, said subject 48. Genetically identical, but our upbringing is different. You, subject 47, had your memory erased and were released into a fake world to live as a successful individual. They wanted to see how you would perform in life with the trauma suppressed. However, I stayed here. I didn't forget the trauma. I fed on it every day. Subject 48 reached out and touched Sarah's face. His fingers were ice cold. Sarah flinched, but couldn't escape. While you were out drinking coffee, falling in love, getting promoted, whispered 48. I was screaming. In these rooms, While you were sleeping in your soft bed, I was shivering on the concrete floor. I watched you, Sarah. For 15 years, I watched you on these screens. Your life was my television show. Sarah pushed the woman. What do you want from me? Why did you call me here? Subject 48 leaned against the console. Because the experiment has reached its final stage. The hypothesis was, when triggered, does repressed memory destroy the person? Or does the person accept the truth and adapt? We brought you here because we're done with you. The data has been collected. Are you going to kill me? Sarah looked around. She was searching for a weapon, an escape route. Death is too simple an end, said 48. No, we will offer you a choice, just like we offer the rats. In the maze, Subject 48 opened a panel on the wall behind him. Inside was an old, clunky elevator called button. He pressed it. A heavy metallic clang echoed from the depths of the building. The elevator was coming up. Upstairs, said 48, looking at the ceiling. The penthouse. Dr. Voss is waiting for you. And the real truth, what I've told you, is just the tip of the iceberg. The real horror is about what you are, what I am. You think you're the original. I'm the copy, said 48 cruelly. What if it's the other way around? The elevator doors opened with a clang. It was dark inside. Get in, said 48. I won't get in, said Sarah. I'll call the police. I'll burn this place down. Your phone won't work, Sarah. Your car is broken. And the police, do you think a place like Winterbourne doesn't have people in the local police? This isn't a government project. It is the government. 48 took a step towards Sarah. A syringe appeared in his hand. Sarah hadn't even seen where he'd gotten it from. Don't make this difficult. Either you get in on your own 2 feet, or I'll drag you in. And believe me, my pain threshold is much higher than yours. Sarah looked at the elevator, then at Subject 48. She had no choice. This woman was her own wild, trained and ruthless version. Fine, said Sarah. She got into the elevator. As the doors closed, Subject 48 waved at her. Don't look down, Sarah, only up. The elevator began to rise, shaking. The groan of the metal cables mingled with Sarah's heartbeat. The elevator stopped. When the doors opened, Sarah found herself not on a roof, but in a massive, glass-domed room. This was an auditorium, but the audience seats were empty. In the middle of the stage was a single chair, and in that chair sat an old man, Dr. Richard Voss. The man whose voice trembled with guilt on the podcast was gone. The man standing before her was dressed in a sharp suit. He had his legs crossed, examining the file in his hand. There was not a trace of remorse on his face. On the contrary, he looked proud. Welcome, Subject 47, said Voss, without looking up. Perfect timing. Right on the minute we predicted. You, Sarah, stepped out of the elevator. She was suppressing her anger and fear. The podcast, it was all a lie. The guilt, The confessions. It was all a ploy to lure me here. Not a game, a narrative, Voss corrected. People love stories, Sarah. Especially redemption stories. We couldn't have brought you here by force. That would have put your mind on the defensive. You had to come willingly. Your curiosity had to be greater than your fear. Sarah walked toward the stage. Why me? Wasn't 15 years enough? Science never says enough, said Voss with a smile. He stood up. He opened the curtain behind him. Sarah's breath caught. Behind the curtain were enormous glass tubes. Tubes filled with liquid. And inside each tube, human body was floating. There were numbers on the tubes. 49, 50, 51. But the first tube, it said 47 on it. Sarah approached the tube. The liquid inside was cloudy, but she could make out a face. The person inside was her, but not her 13-year-old self, her current self, 28-year-old Sarah. She seemed to be sleeping. Her chest rose and fell slightly. Dozens of cables and tubes were attached to her body. Sarah brought her hands to her hair and tugged at it. What does this mean? If she's there, who am I? Voss came over. His voice was fatherly in tone, but venomous. You, Sarah, you are the mind of the body in that tube. You are a projection. No, Sarah shouted. She slammed her hand against the glass. Her voice was hollow, and she felt the pain in her hand. I can feel it. I can touch it. My hand hurts. I'm real. Our simulation technology has advanced greatly, said Voss. Have you seen The Matrix? The philosophy was correct, but the technology was primitive. We simulate not only the image, but also the senses. Pain, smell, taste. We didn't release you 15 years ago, Sarah. We put you in that tube. We connected a cable to your mind and loaded the simulation of a successful psychologist living in Boston onto you. That life you lived, that career, those friends, none of it existed. You've been sleeping in this room, in that water, for 15 years. Sarah collapsed to the floor. Her legs wouldn't carry her anymore. She wanted to vomit, but was there really anything in her stomach? Or was that too just a piece of code? Prove it, she said, sobbing. You're lying. You want proof. Voss pulled a small remote control from his pocket. That unbearable headache you're feeling right now, I can stop it. He pressed the button. The pain in Sarah's head stopped instantly. Not only did it stop, her mind became crystal clear. Her fatigue was gone. Now then, said Voss, let's say I'm a little thirsty. He pressed the button again. He pressed the button again. Sarah's throat suddenly became as dry as a desert. She started coughing, unable to breathe. She needed water right now. Voss pressed the button again. The feeling of thirst disappeared. See, said Voss, I am God, Sarah. I am the God in your universe. I control your feelings, your pain, your desires. Sarah was trembling on the floor, curled up in a fetal position. Why, she moaned. Why all this effort? to map the limits of the human mind, said Voss. In a virtual reality, can a person completely forget their traumatic past and be happy? Or does the subconscious always find a way to claw at the truth? You, Sarah, you failed. You couldn't find peace even within the simulation. You wrote about dark characters, watched thriller movies. Your mind kept giving you clues. It was saying, wake up. And here you are. You woke up, sort of. Sarah raised her head. There were tears in her eyes, but behind those tears, subject 47's stubborn anger glowed. So now what? She said. Are you going to pull the plug? No, said Voss. I'm going to give you a real choice. No tricks this time. He spread his hands wide. Option 1, you go back to the simulation. We erase your memory. You forget tonight, this place, me, everything. You go back to your life in Boston, to that safe cocoon. You die happy, but inside a lie. Option 2 will take you out of that tube. You'll wake up in the real world, but I warn you, the real world isn't like your Boston in the simulation. The world outside has changed a lot, Sarah. Wars, famine, and your muscles haven't worked in 15 years. You won't be able to walk. You'll have trouble speaking. Your family is truly dead. You have no one. You'll be naked, weak, and alone. But you'll be free. Voss leaned in, bringing his face close to Sarah's. Tell me, subject 47, do you want that sweet lie? Or that bitter, ugly truth? Sarah looked at her body in the tube. It was pale, weak, defenseless. Then she thought of Boston in her mind. Hot coffee, a soft bed, being a respected doctor. Which was more terrifying? A paradise that didn't exist, or a hellish reality? Sarah stood up. Her trembling had stopped. She looked into Voss's eyes. There's a third option, she said. Voss frowned. There is no such option. There is, said Sarah, and she smiled. This was not subject 48's empty smile. This was the smile of the hunted, who had found the hunter's weak spot. There's something you're forgetting, Dr. Voss. If I'm a simulation, if this mind is programmed. Sarah closed her eyes. She focused on her mind, on her body in that tube, on the cables, on the flow. What are you doing? Said Voss, his voice sounding nervous for the first time. I'm hacking the system from the inside, whispered Sarah. Don't be ridiculous. You can't do that. Your brainwaves aren't strong enough. Voss began pressing buttons on the console. Stop. I'm shutting down the simulation. But it was too late. In her mind, Sarah focused on moving the fingers of the body in the tube. Not the simulation body, the real body. Sarah focused in her mind on moving the fingers of the body in the tube. Not the simulated body, but the real one. Move your pinky finger. The pinky finger of 28-year-old Sarah in the tube twitched. No, Voss rushed to the tube. Open your eyes. The eyelids of the Sarah in the tube fluttered. The simulation world began to shake. The image was distorting. Pixels were shifting. Wake up. And Sarah Mitchell pressed the button for the apocalypse she had created. The glass tube exploded with a loud bang. The sound of the glass shattering echoed not in her ears, but in her bones. The silence that followed was more violent than the explosion. Sarah was on the verge of drowning as she tried to expel the thick, sticky fluid filling her lungs. Breathing was no longer an automatic, effortless act like in the simulation. Each breath felt like thousands of rusty splinters piercing her ribcage. Her biological reflexes kicked in for the first time in years, her body convulsing uncontrollably, and she vomited the bile in her stomach and the nourishing gel in her lungs onto the concrete floor. Her biological reflexes kicked in for the first time in years. Her body convulsed uncontrollably, and she vomited the bile in her stomach and the nourishing gel in her lungs onto the concrete floor. The sound coming from her throat was inhuman. It was like the last breath of an animal. His throat was irritated, his vocal cords rusted and stuck together from 15 years of silence. He collapsed onto the ground, into the disgusting pool of his own vomit, blood, and that sticky fluid. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelashes were sealed shut with dried gel. He tried to clean his face with his trembling hands. When his fingertips touched his face, he was horrified. His skin was so thin, so fragile, it felt like it would tear. When he managed to open his eyes, he saw the world under a blurry, flickering, sickly yellow light. The sterile, bright white auditorium from the simulation was gone. Dr. Voss's sleek, opera-like laboratory was gone. This place smelled like a slaughterhouse. The stench of rotting seaweed, rusty iron, dried feces, and burnt plastic burned her nostrils. Sarah tried to lift her head, but her neck felt as heavy as stone. She couldn't manage it. Her jaw slammed against the hard floor. Pain. The pain was so sharp, so real and raw that Sarah wanted to cry. But her tear ducts were dry. Her body had been drained of fluid, leaving only bare nerve, endings transmitting pain. She looked at her arms, and in that moment, she wanted to scream at what she saw, but no sound came out. Those arms, they weren't the arms of Sarah Mitchell, who exercised in Boston, held a pen, drank coffee, and admired herself in the mirror. They were skin and bone. The muscle tissue had melted away. The skin had become transparent, revealing the purple network of veins beneath like a diseased map. Her elbow bones were sharp enough to pierce the skin. A body that had never fought gravity. For 15 years, only floated inside a tube. Atrophy, a living corpse. Welcome. The voice came from the dark corner of the room, behind a massive pile of scrap metal. Sarah tried to crawl on her elbows. She couldn't feel her legs. Her lower body seemed non-existent, just a dead, paralyzed weight she had to drag. As she crawled, the broken glass on the floor cut her thin skin. Blood spread across the concrete, warm, dark, and sticky. This blood wasn't a simulation. It wasn't made of pixels. This blood was alive and was leaving her quickly. The yellow emergency light on the hilltop word, and revealed the owner of the voice in a momentary flash of light. Dr. Voss, but he too had changed. That charismatic, suit-wearing scientist with a god complex was gone. Before him sat a wreck, slumped in a rusty wheelchair, half his body covered in horrific, chemical burn scars, breathing through a hole in his throat. In the old man's lap lay a primitive tablet, its cables protruding, its screen cracked. He was trying to hold the tablet with his trembling, stained hand. Sarah's voice was nothing but a rasp from her lungs. Where is this? The electronic device in Voss's throat crackled as it spoke. Its voice was metallic, soulless, and mechanical. Real, this is real, Sarah. Don't you like it? Yet, I offered you that perfect paradise I created in the depths of your mind. Sarah looked around. This was an abandoned underground shelter. Water seeped from the walls. Poisonous fumes rose from burst pipes in the ceiling. There were dozens of other tubes around, but most were broken. The bodies inside, they had rotted. Skeletons, semi-liquid remains, dried skin fragments. They're dead, said Voss, following Sarah's horrified gaze. The system failed. The energy ran out. The war outside consumed the resources. I could only keep you alive. My final project. My last hope. My masterpiece. Sarah coughed, clotted blood coming from her mouth. Why did you keep me alive? Why didn't you wake me? Voss rolled his wheelchair closer to her with a creak. His eyes held that hazy look, oscillating between madness and a twisted mercy. You don't see the outside, Sarah. The sky is gray. There is no sun. The air is poisonous. Humanity is finished. Keeping you in that tube, giving you Boston. The coffee shops, those stupid podcasts, even your traumatic memories. That was my gift to you, my mercy. I fed you dreams in the midst of annihilation. You're lying, Sarah said. She was clenching her teeth, her jaw about to break. You didn't do it because you loved me. You used me like a toy, like a test subject. Love and experiment. What's the difference, Sarah? Both require observation. Both involve desires for control. Voss touched the tablet. A crackling, distorted sound rose from the broken speaker in the corner of the room. The opening music of that true crime podcast in the simulation. But here, in this damp ruin, that cheerful jingle sounded like a terrible dirge. I can put you back to sleep, Sarah. I can do a manual transition. It'll hurt a bit. I'll have to stick a thick needle into your brain, but then you'll wake up in your nice office again. Your legs will work. Your stomach will be full. Rebecca will listen to you. Just let me. Voss leaned forward from his chair with a syringe, its tip rusty, that he had taken from his lab coat pocket. Sarah looked at her legs. They were motionless, dead. She looked at Voss. He was approaching. That rusty needle was the key to that fake paradise. All she had to do was surrender. Escape this pain, this smell, this helplessness. Close her eyes and return to Boston. But then her eye caught something glinting on the floor. A long, sharp, bloody piece of glass, like a razor, had shot out of the tube. Subject 48's voice echoed in Sarah's mind. Freedom is uncertainty. Security is a cage. Voss brought the needle close to the carotid artery in Sarah's neck. Sleep, little girl. Let the nightmare end. Sarah gathered her last remaining strength in her thin, trembling arm muscles. Adrenaline popped through her veins one last time. She grabbed the piece of glass. You are the nightmare. She swung the glass upward. Not at Voss's needle-holding hand, but directly into that electronic device on his throat, that breathing hole. Voss's eyes widened. He tried to scream, but the device shattered, so no sound came out. Only a muffled air noise, a wet hiss, was heard. He staggered backward, the wheelchair, lost its balance, and crashed to the ground with a metallic clang. As the old man thrashed on the floor, Sarah crawled away. Voss's hands clawed at the air. His legs kicked aimlessly. Sarah didn't look back. She didn't listen for the gurgling to stop. She felt neither triumph nor regret. Only the cold, metallic taste of survival. In front of her was a heavy iron door. It had faint letters spelling out surface access danger. Faded letters spelled out surface access danger. On it, Sarah reached the door. She wrapped her arms around the cold handle. She threw her entire body weight against it. Her muscles burned as if they were tearing apart. Her bones cracked. Open, open. The rusty mechanism resisted, groaned, and finally turned with a loud clank. The door swung open. Fresh air did not rush in. Wind rushed in, but this wind smelled of rotten eggs, ash, and sulfur. Sarah fell out the door into a long, pitch-black stairwell. The steps led upward, stretching into infinity. I must walk, she told herself. Even if I have to crawl, even if I have to claw my way up, I must get out. Did climbing those stairs take minutes or centuries? He didn't know. The concept of time had vanished. Each step was a battle. His knees were shattered, his skin peeled off. Every protrusion on the concrete pierced his flesh. The blood on his hands dried, formed scabs, then bled again. Sometimes he fainted, lying on that cold step for minutes. Then he woke to the sound of a mouse, or a distant drip, gritted his teeth, and kept climbing. His mind began playing tricks on him. At the top of the stairs, he saw his mother. Come on. Sarah, dinner's ready. Your father is waiting, her mother said, her face melting like a candle. As it flowed, she saw Rebecca, notebook in hand. This is just a metaphor, Sarah. The stairs are your subconscious. You're not actually moving, she said. "Shut up," Sarah shouted into the void. Her voice was stronger now. Pure ray fed her. Finally, she saw a light. Above, another door. It was ajar, and through that crack a gray, pale flickering light seeped out. Sarah clawed her way up the last steps. She shouldered the door and rolled out into that light. Rain. The first thing to hit her face was rain. Cold, hard, stinging raindrops. Sarah rolled onto her back. She looked up at the sky. Voss was right. The sky was gray, lead-colored, heavy, sick sky. There was no sun. Only thick, dirty layers of clouds. Sarah struggled to her feet. She crawled to the edge of the roof, clinging to a railing. She pulled herself up with trembling legs. Her knees locked, her ankles ached, but she stood. For the first time in 15 years, she stood on her own 2 feet, in her own world. She looked down. She wanted to see the world, and the sight took her breath away. Her brain short-circuited, unable to process what she saw. There was no city. There was no forest. The battlefield Voss had spoken of, the ruins, the burned buildings, none of it was there. Below, there was nothing. Where the building ended, the world ended too. There was no horizon. The ground ended in a sharp blackness. It was as if someone had erased the rest of the world with an eraser. An infinite, bottomless nothingness surrounded the building, but the real horror was above. Sarah raised her head. She looked at those gray clouds, at the falling rain. The raindrops were strange. They fell, hovered in the air, then rose a few inches, before falling again. A glitch. Sarah rubbed her eyes, forcing her eyelids open with her bloody fingers. "No," she whispered, "this is a hallucination. My brain is damaged. I was deprived of oxygen." Behind the clouds, Sarah saw the truth. Behind the clouds, there was no sky. There was a massive grid, like wire mesh, but a huge cage made of neon. Lights. The sky was nothing, but a massive curved LED screen covering it. And the lightning was a group of dead pixels on that screen. "Voss," Sarah said, against the howling wind. She began to laugh. "You didn't know either. You were just a figurehead too. That shelter, that ruin, those rotting bodies, that post-apocalyptic world story. They were also stage props. The dystopian reality scenario. A darker, more painful, more dramatic layer designed to give them a sense of reality. When the first simulation subjects weren't satisfied, or the audience got bored, because the human mind believed it was alive when it suffered. Pain was the most convincing lie. Sarah clung to the railings. She was dripping wet from the rain, laughing wildly. Every wound on her body, every pain was fake, or so real that the fakeness was flawless. "It's over," she shouted up at that fake sky. "I get it, I see. What's next? An alien invasion, a zombie outbreak. What lie comes next?" The sky didn't answer, but a voice was heard. This voice didn't come from the speaker. It came directly from inside his mind, echoing off the walls of his skull. But this time, the voice wasn't Marcus's, Voss's, or Subject 48's. This voice was a much larger, much more muffled roar, a chorus of whispers, thousands of different voices piled on top of each other. I think he'll jump. I bet he'll jump. No, it'll continue next season. I saw the trailer. The graphics are great, but the script is a bit cliché. The Voss character was too weak. Subject 47 is my favorite. I hope they don't kill him. I'm bored. Change the channel. Sarah froze. Her blood ran cold. These were viewers. They weren't God. They weren't scientists. They were just watching. They were consuming. Sarah realized that her life, her pain, her trauma, those 15 years in that tube, the blood she spilled on those stairs, were just someone's evening entertainment. She wasn't a test subject. She was content, and the content had one purpose: to keep the viewer glued to the screen. It had to endure pain to entertain them. Sarah hung from the railings. She looked down into that endless black void, that unrendered nothingness. What would happen if she jumped? Would she be erased? Or would she restart in the next scene, perhaps in a hospital bed, as an accident victim who lost her memory? She turned around. The door on the roof creaked open. The person who entered through the door was not Dr. Voss. It was not Rebecca. It was not Subject 48. The person who entered through the door was 13-year-old Sarah. In her hand, an old, worn-out toy doll. On her face, an innocent yet unsettling smile. She wore the dress she had worn that day, the day of the accident. There were no bloodstains. It was spotless. "Is the game over, sis?" the little girl asked. Her voice was clear enough to drown out the sound of the rain, the hum of the fans. "The audience is bored. The audience is bored." Sarah looked at the little girl, then at the broken, pixelated sky above. Then, as if looking at an invisible camera, she looked directly into the void, at us. Her gaze pierced the screen. Her eyes were fixed on her doll. It was as if she could see us, those reading this story now, watching this video, enjoying her pain. "The game," said Sarah, her face wearing a tired, resigned but all-knowing expression, "is just beginning, but this time, I'm not in control." Sarah stepped forward. She let go of the railings. She spread her arms wide, as if crucified, and she let herself fall into that black void, that digital nothingness. She didn't feel the wind as she fell. She didn't feel her stomach drop. She didn't feel fear. She only heard the voice, the director's weary, authoritative voice. "Cut." The image froze. Sarah hung suspended in the air. Raindrops crystallized in midair. The 13-year-old girl's smile turned into a frozen mask. The glitches in the background froze. Everything turned into a massive, three-dimensional, distorted photograph. Then the photograph slowly began to burn, darken, and melt from the edges. Black complete, silent, deep black. And then, within that darkness, faint, almost inaudible, the sound and whisper of someone pressing keyboard keys could be heard. File 47 archived. Load the awakening scenario for subject 48. Begin preparations. The observers are waiting.